Hey everybody, it's Dan Simitovich, co-host of Deviant. Andrew Iden will be along in just a minute to tell part 4 of our investigation into the Hart family murders. As we've mentioned before, there are ways to go deeper on this story beyond just listening to the show. Visit our Patreon at deviantpodcast.com to see documents, watch videos, hear audio that we don't get to go into in full detail here in the show. Again, that's deviantpodcast.com, and the pricing starts at free. Also, make sure you're following us and interacting with us on social at deviant.podcast on Instagram and TikTok. All right, let's get into the show. There are parts of what you're about to hear that can be difficult to listen to.
In mid-July of 2006, Priscilla Celestine of Houston, Texas, is getting used to a full house. She has 3 children living with her, all of whom are siblings, and they're in need of a permanent home. The parental rights of their mother and father have been severed.
Miss Celestine was in her mid-50s, early 60s at the time.
That's Mia Williams. And at the time, she's working in Houston for the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services.
This woman was still working. This woman had 2 jobs to make sure that she was able to maintain a home and a stable livelihood for these children. She was the great aunt who had an expressed interest in wanting to adopt those children. And she had a significant relationship with the children, which is a caveat to why she was so heavily involved in the case.
She's also working Miss Celestine's case.
So I was responsible for reuniting families based on the Texas Family Code and also to help children to transition into permanent placements. So my connection to this particular case is that during a massive exodus from social work in child welfare, specifically in Houston, there were cases that had to be transferred throughout the department so that the cases could continue to be worked. So in that regard, I was in that shuffle, that case came across my desk.
And because Miss Celestine is blood related to 2 of the 3 children, she's the natural next option for them, which, as adoption experts will tell you, is the preferred option when possible.
The first move, and always the move, for lack of a better phrasing, is that you are supposed to continuously look for family members. Throughout the life of the case, the role is to continuously be in pursuit of family members so that the children can maintain some sort of familial connection. And so that's why Miss Celestine was so insistent on wanting to have the children placed in her home.
In order for Miss Celestine to establish full custody of the children, there's a probationary period.
6 months is generally like the gauging period where we will be able to assess to determine, okay, do we need to put in any additional services? Are the children thriving in these places? And 6 months is usually like the period in which that assessment can occur. And after that 6 months, it's easy for us to go back to court and say, okay, Your Honor, the children have been here, they're thriving, they're safe. We believe that we should proceed with making this a forever home for these children.
Miss Celestine's attempt at providing a home for those 3 children ends in December of 2006, when they're removed from her home for good, just a few weeks shy of the end of the probationary period.
From what I understand, an unannounced visit occurred by a CPS caseworker. And what it was alleged was that the mother, whose parental rights was terminated, was at the home unsupervised with the children.
According to court records, their birth mother isn't permitted to be with the children unsupervised. And according to the CPS caseworker who makes the unannounced visit, what she finds is the birth mother with the children unsupervised. But Miss Celestine is strongly disputing that.
According to Miss Celestine, her daughter was present at the home. And fortunate that a snap decision was made on this case when it was probably less than 30 days left before the 6-month period would have occurred.
Here's an important point. In Texas, violating a policy during that 6-month trial period, like the birth mother being in the home, doesn't actually mean automatic removal of the children. Judges do have flexibility. They can waive that rule, and they do regularly. But in this case, 5.5 months into the 6-month requirement, they just don't.
That flimsy statute, and that's a statute that's in the family code, that, within that 6-month time frame, and the fact that Miss Celestine had this infraction in less than 30 days, like that was not even weighed in consideration of the long-term impact that this removal would have on their lives.
This 6-month period is like 97% over, and everything has checked out. And this infraction occurs based on your knowledge of the system and these different policies that are in place. Did this rise to the level of these children being removed from her home at the end of that 6-month period?
I don't believe it was. I think that Miss Celestine should have been offered additional services, or to really weigh the situation out. When you arrived, were the children in danger? Was there really someone there with the children at the time? To remove those children from a forever home that they were comfortable in and were thriving in, for an infraction such, and again, the mother should not have been in the home, but she wasn't unsupervised. And that's the caveat to this case. Yes, the mother was there, but she was not unsupervised. She was not there alone. And that would have been something that I would have taken into consideration.
So for these children to be removed, it sort of gives the impression of like a zero tolerance of any kind of violation. And what you're saying, it sounds like it's often not that swift, right? There would have been maybe, and I'm just kind of using layman's terms, a warning that could be problematic for you trying to establish permanent custody. Is that right?
Absolutely. And again, I know in the CPS culture, you want to err on the side of caution. However, I just do believe that if all of the circumstances were laid out on the table, I would have left those children in the home and provided additional support or supervision for that family in an effort to maintain the connection.
You're hearing the phrase CPS a lot in this episode, and generally that stands for Child Protective Services. It's got a bunch of different names depending on the state and the municipality. Just know that in this case, CPS is any one of the government agencies that's tasked with protecting kids in the adoption and foster care system. Priscilla Celestine, who passes away in 2021, puts up a fight. She takes Texas to court in an attempt to keep those 3 children in her home. But in the eyes of that court, the damage is done, and Miss Celestine's appeal is denied.
When that case came to my unit, I may have had it all of 45 days, and I had to do the transfer myself. And so in reading it, yes, I told her, the adoption prep work, and for me, it felt like she had like some concerns at the beginning, and each concern that she mentioned, like, I can't remember exactly what they were, but I know I was very supportive and intentional about letting her know, no, this is a good placement. The children, based on my notes and what I've read and the documentation, this is a good placement. And Miss Celestine called me just to make sure that everything was going well, that she was going to be able to adopt the children. She was very compliant with all requests of CPS. And the fact that she was not presented in a favorable light to the court system, that really changed the trajectory of the lives of these children in this case.
By June of 2008, the children are more than 1,200 miles away in Alexandria, Minnesota with their brand new family and their brand new moms, Jennifer and Sarah Hart. We're all wired differently. Some of us are wired for good, some of us are wired for bad. But a select few step outside all of society's boundaries. From Cold Open Media, this is Deviant, the Hart Family Homicides, Part 4. Welcome back to Deviant, where we chase the truth into the dark corners of what people are capable of. I'm Andrew Iden. In our first episode on this case, we talked about the stops all along the way that could have altered this story, dramatically changed the ending. It never would have gotten to the Juan Creek turnout, that majestic cliff at the Pacific Ocean. It never would have gotten to the Safeway store in Fort Bragg, California. The story of Priscilla Celestine and her desire to adopt Devante, Sierra, and Jeremiah is a glaring example of maybe the first instance in which these children's paths should have gone in a different direction. It also exposes a very real issue in the process of adoption.
There is a very real relationship to trauma that occurs when there's a separation from family of origin, at whatever age.
That's April Dinwoody. She's the former chief executive of the Donaldson Adoption Institute. She's also an expert in matters of adoption policy, transracial adoption, and she's followed this case closely.
And certainly if you think about it from birth, there's the trauma of being separated from the mother who carried you.
Here's Mia Williams again.
They'd already been removed from their mother. And now to be once again immediately uprooted out of a home they've known for the last 6 to 12 months, and to be placed again in stranger care, aka foster care.
The removal of the children from Miss Celestine's home, just a few weeks shy of the 6-month probationary period, raises questions and a larger, broader issue in the child care system.
I believe that had Miss Celestine been of another ethnicity, white, those children 9 times out of 10 wouldn't have been removed. And I'll just even go a step further. They probably would have had the additional resources to hire legal representation. But you know what? Even in that regard, Miss Celestine took on, like I said, an extra job to be able to hire her own attorney, and it still didn't help her.
When you look at just the overrepresentation of Black and brown children who are engaged in the child welfare system, they are placed in foster care after having, been separated from their families of origin. Those parental relationships are terminated more quickly and more often with Black families than there are with white families.
Nobody's talking about CPS these days. Nobody is saying, hey, what are you doing? We need more people just to go and sit down in the courthouse and just watch how many Black children are being removed versus how many white children are being removed for the same infractions. I know for a fact, I've seen so many times where there could be 2 moms who both had pregnancies where they tested positive for an illegal substance. Oftentimes, you'll see the white mother being able to take her child into rehab with her, where the Black mom is denied. That's not uncommon.
I've seen it in real time at agencies here in New York, where there are clearly a different set of rules for Black and brown families that I've seen in working in real time. And the data sort of plays that through in terms of the number of young people and children that are separated and the rate at which those children are then entrusted into new families.
Whether Jeremiah, Devante, and Sierra were taken from Miss Celestine because of a racial bias is tough to determine officially, but Mia Williams, who knows the community, the courts, and the system in Houston, is certain.
I do believe that it was racial prejudice. I just don't believe that Miss Celestine was given the same grace as these 2 white women across the country.
On March 22nd, 2009, Jennifer Hart has a new family. And in an eerie coincidence, nearly 9 years to the day before the crash, she sits down at her computer and writes an email.
The kids are all doing swell. I don't know why they insist on growing up on me. Sierra will be 4 next month. Abby and Jeremiah are 5 now. Devante 6, Hannah 7, and Marcus 10.
Underneath a lot of this, we talk about narrative, is in the world of adoption, it's always like the bad family of origin, the bad birth parents, and the good adoptive parents. There's like bad parents that don't take care of their children. They don't love their children. They don't look after them. They're bad people. Then there's like the good saviors that come in to take care of these poor, broken children. And when you get race involved in that, it's even more riddled with issues.
Devante, Jeremiah, and Sierra are doing incredibly well. You wouldn't know they're the same kids that came to our home 9 months ago.
What are some of the factors at play that may not necessarily exist with a Black family adopting Black children or a white family adopting white children?
Some of the basic elements are identity formation, creating a healthy sense of self in relationship to racial identity, which, unless you are being very thoughtful and mindful of that process as a white parent and doing your own work to understand your cultural identity as a white person, it's very difficult to pass that along to a child that is entrusted to you through adoption, does not share your race, your culture. So that's one that's rooted in identity. I think right next to that is when there is not enough awareness, attention to programming and learning around what Black and brown children need to be protected in the world, there's a whole nother layer. So a couple big buckets and then a lot of layers in between.
I'm so proud of them for all they have accomplished in such a short time. We finalized their adoption last month. Thank goodness. I've been a ball of anxiety just waiting for that day to come.
When Jen and Sarah adopt Devante, Jeremiah, and Sierra, they go through a private agency in Minnesota called the Permanent Family Resource Center. How an agency in Minnesota gets children from Texas adopted out into their community isn't quite clear. And when you read some of the agency's documents regarding the Hart's case plan, they make clear that Jen and Sarah do the prep work necessary before the kids arrive. It says they're culturally competent and the school the kids will attend is racially diverse. It says they have plans to constantly expose the kids to culturally diverse experiences and resources.
The biggest cohort of transracial adoptions are those that are white parents who adopt Black and brown children or children of another race. So yes, Black people adopt white children. Yes, other races adopt other races. But by and large, the biggest data bucket is white parents who adopt children of another race. I think one of the biggest reasons is that there's this narrative in the world about adoption that the overpowering sense is that it's a better option. Everybody's better once they get adopted. It's either the fairy tale, or in some cases the nightmare, but almost always the Hollywood narrative is like, this is amazing, everybody is great in the end. And we'd like to believe as a society that everybody's great in the end. And that's just not the case. So we have this these narratives that help impact the lack of urgency around preparing parents for both of those two big things.
One of the most haunting things in the thousands of pages of documents on this case is a letter from one of the Texas social workers facilitating the adoption of Marcus, Hannah, and Abigail. They are the first set of siblings. And in that letter, she writes, quote, Marcus, Hannah, and Abigail have blossomed in their new home. Jen and Sarah could adopt a whole household full, and none of the kids would experience anything but benefits from the addition to the family. I would highly recommend them to anyone seeking an adoptive family. And that's not the first glowing review, because that agency went on to say in another report, quote, I wholeheartedly recommend the Hart Family for a sibling group of up to 3 children ages 0 to 8. I believe the Hart Family would be an excellent resource for African American children since they have parented 3 biracial children and have attended trainings on parenting children from another race. The Hart Family has the knowledge and experience to parent children with mild to moderate cognitive, behavioral, emotional, and learning disorders.
There are countless examples that I have of parents, adoptive parents, of any race and culture that present themselves in a much more favorable light than they actually live their lives. They want the children, they want the babies. So by any means necessary, they are going to find the narrative that the agencies want to see. These are safe parents, they have the white picket fence, they want to present themselves as that because they think that's what is going to get them the child. Even in a small enclosed way, having that be the spirit that a family is moving in, like, we saved you, you ought to be grateful. Even if the world didn't know that, that is a horrible way to have to feel in your family. knowing that love and being looked after is conditional.
The Hart family, as we know them, a family of 8, starts in Alexandria, Minnesota. It's where the kids move. It's where the adoption agency operates. And it's where, for the very first time, Jen and Sarah come in contact with the system. It's where a paper trail begins. On November 15th, 2010, 6-year-old Abigail Hart reports to her teacher she has what she calls owies on her stomach and her back. And it's her mom who did it. When investigators go to the home, Sarah Hart claims responsibility and says she and Jen had found a penny in Abigail's pocket, and when confronted about it, suspected she was lying, and they spanked her, bent her over the bathtub. In the report, Sarah says the spanking, quote, got out of control. One of the children, when being interviewed by investigators, says, quote, Mom Jen spanks the most and acts tough when she's upset with the children. 2 months after that incident, 8-year-old Hannah is seen multiple times, approaching classmates asking for food, telling the school nurse she hasn't eaten and that Jen has been angry with her. According to the report, quote, the Minnesota workers said after a while, the school stopped calling the parents about the children taking food because they didn't want the children disciplined or punished. It goes on to say that Abigail, at age 6, looks like she's 2. And when investigators confront the parents about food and the children's complaints of not getting enough of it, the mothers always, quote, make reference to the children being adopted and being high-risk kids with food issues. The result of all of this? In April of 2011, Sarah Hart, not Jen, is charged with misdemeanor domestic assault and malicious punishment of a child. The malicious punishment charge is dismissed, and she gets a year of probation and community service. It's around that time that Jen and Sarah pull the kids from public school. They'll be homeschooled with Jen as their teacher. At the bottom of the Minnesota Child Welfare Report, there's a note from the caseworker, and it's one of the first that shows real, tangible concern. It says, without any regular academic or medical oversight, these children risk falling through the cracks. By 2013, the Harts have moved. It's what they do.
Oftentimes, the children would be yanked out of school, and then you see a pattern of these women moving.
That's Shannon Barney of the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office. You heard him earlier in this series. He investigated the crash at the Wan Creek turnout.
They move from Minnesota, and then they move out to Oregon, and there they have a CPS report, and after that, then they move to Washington, and it's almost like they're staying ahead of their reports, just one step at a time.
In July of 2013, the Harts are living in West Lynn, Oregon. It's a suburban community outside Portland, and at 3:30, school is letting out. It's suburban America, the kind of place kids should flourish. But the Hart kids aren't in the West Lynn schools. They're learning at home from Jen. And on July 18th, someone makes an anonymous call to the Clackamas County Department of Human Services saying the 6 Hart children don't look healthy. The next day, CPS and police arrive at their home and knock several times. No one answers. For more than a month, Jen and Sarah avoid investigators, missing calls, ignoring voicemails. All that comes from the complaint is that CPS says Jen and Sarah must take the kids to the doctor for medical evaluations. And when they do, the doctor isn't concerned. The clinic writes in their notes, quote, all of the kids have been in for physicals, and the doctor had no concerns whatsoever with any of the children. For the height that each of them are, their weight is where it should be as well. Look, I'm not one to tell a doctor what they do or don't see, but concerns about their size have been made known. And it's what's so maddening about this case. There is a doctor. There are caseworkers in Oregon. There are teachers in Minnesota. There are caseworkers in Minnesota. There is even a judge in Houston, Texas. And all of them have the opportunity to change the trajectory of this case. Here again is Mia Williams and April Dinwoody.
I remember when I first saw the picture of Devante hugging the police officer, and I didn't think anything of it. And then I was at home when I saw the reports about what happened. And I remember Devontae Hart. Well, that was his new name. And they talked about them being in custody in Houston. And I was like, wait a minute. And then I messaged one of my old coworkers. I was like, hey, do you remember the Devontae and Miss Celestine, blah, blah, blah? And she's like, oh, yeah. And then it all started to come back to me about, 'cause I just remember Miss Celestine being so intentional in contacting me. Meaning, like, she would call me all the time. That's how I remembered the case. And all I could say was, be damn. And I cried. It wasn't fair.
Still bothers you.
Absolutely it does. Because it did not have to end that way.
Ironically enough, when I figured out that those children, specifically Devante, had already gone viral, hugging that police officer during the George Floyd protests, and that being a symbol of everything's going to be okay. There's this weeping black boy being hugged by a white police officer. That never passed the smell test for me. There was something about that image that didn't feel right to me. One, I don't think children and young people ought to be going viral because adults like to see it and it makes grown up feel better. Like that I have a whole issue with, but something didn't ring true. Something just didn't sit right with me. I couldn't figure it out. I didn't pay that much attention to it. There was a lot going on at the time. So fast forward, when I figured out that the Hart children included Devontae, I was like, wait a second. Now it actually makes sense. People go viral all the time. And they're making money on these platforms, on YouTube, on on TikTok. They're making money in it. And to me, I just think it's so private, and these children should not exist for the consumption of the internet. They just shouldn't. It's just not a fair thing. It creates all kinds of problems for children at school, again, for their personhood, for their identity, for their privacy. And then the rest of the world sees and go, oh my gosh, isn't that cute? Isn't that amazing? Oh my gosh, look at that cute little black baby with those white parents. It's like we're fiending for it.
All I can see is his eyes. I look into his eyes. That hug, his eyes told me, somebody please help me. The way he was holding, the posture, his body language, that was not like I'm hugging you because I want peace in this country and I want everyone to love me like it appears that my parents love me. This was, can you please help me? Even the way he was grabbing the officer's jacket, like I dissected that whole picture. That was a significant cry for help.
It is very easy to sit here years later and say that CPS, or the system, a phrase I'm even hesitant to use here really, is at fault, because there's a lot of layers. But to be clear, that's not the charge we're making either, because the death of these children, Marcus, Hannah, Abigail, Jeremiah, Devontae, and Sierra Hart, lies solely at the feet of their mothers. But this story does warrant a very hard look at all of those junctions along the way that could have changed the ending, and the hard truth that yes, they had a chance to do something.
Each of the system had their hand in what happened to those children. And I'm going to tell you, Texas gave them the baton, because had Texas not removed those children in the first place, Devontae probably will have graduated high school by now.
There's no system on a national level or a state to state level that I'm aware of where these reports go in and some other agency can see it. So, for instance, if I arrest a guy in Charlotte, Montana, and I book him in the county jail, somebody in Fort Bragg, California can run his criminal history and it'll show that arrest in Charlotte, Montana. That doesn't happen with CPS. And so what they end up doing is they go out, they investigate. If they can find out where the person came from, they can then backtrack to that CPS and say, did you have any information?
The system's complicated. And I had no pleasure in talking about how broken certain things are. I don't. It's like, and that's not the point. It doesn't make sense to do that. It's not practical. It's not helpful. There are great people doing great work to try to do things better. However, when people are not in it for the right reasons, in this circumstance, it really does show. And it shows us that there are folks that either by will or by skill or a combination of both are not prepared enough to be doing some of the most intricate work there is for our society, which is looking after children. And so we can't but come to the conclusion that there has to be more work being done to protect children, to protect them in a way that means professionals have to do more work and we have to pour more resources into making sure they have what they need to do this difficult work, and to make sure that there isn't a lack of attention being paid to differences of race and culture, mental health issues, abuse and neglect.
Really, CPS, they're given a task that is almost impossible to meet. They're overloaded. They don't have the resources they need, and they don't have the information available to them, to do anything about some of these cases.
You always want to err on the side of caution to make sure, because once children come to the attention of CPS, the role is to mitigate the circumstances that brought the family to the attention of CPS to begin with. It doesn't always have to be immediate removal, but if in fact it is immediate removal, our role is to one, reunify the family if at all possible. And if you're using good social work skills, and I don't mean the unwritten practices that are often mired in government structures, it's not written, but it's just we've been doing this for so long, this is just how we do it. If that way of thinking was absolved, I think we would have a better system. But the bias that's ingrained in the system, even you can come in with the best intentions, but you will get swallowed up by the semantics of the system in order, one, to keep your livelihood and to uphold the system.
I don't think there's any more intricate human work than making sure we're looking after children who have been abused and neglected and separated from family of origin. This time the system didn't get it right. And it was massive. And my hope is that there has been some movement to honor this tragedy and the lives of these young human beings, such that we're working every day to make sure something like this doesn't happen again.
Next time on Deviant.
When our detectives talked to the Washington detectives who had interviewed the neighbors who divulged that, that at least one child had run over to their house and begged for food.
It's our final episode on the Hart family homicides.
The other night, a little girl jumped out of the second-story window on the roof and then down onto the ground and ran to my daughter.
And we'll look at the last few days and what led Jen and Sarah to make one final try at outrunning the system.
Dispatch, can I help you? Who are we checking on?
The mothers are Sarah and Jennifer Hart.
Okay.
And according to my intake, they have 6 children in the home.
Until next time, thanks for listening. Deviant is executive produced by Clark Goldband, Dan Semitovich, and me, Andrew Iden. Clark is our story editor and booker, and the show is written and produced by me and Dan with original scoring by Shuvo Sir. Voice acting by Jessica Wilbanks. Sales, marketing, and distribution support comes from our partners at Gemini 13. Deviant is a production of Cold Open Media.